Hello and welcome to the first edition of our new show, Mosaic, an African American perspective. On Mosaic, we will explore issues of interest within the African American community. I'm Deborah Milo, and my guests today are Odessa Shannon, Ruby Rubens, and Dr. Paul Vance. Today, we will be paying tribute to someone who had a profound impact on countless people, Roscoe Nix, who died earlier this year at the age of 90. Roscoe Nix leaves behind a legacy of fighting for change and equality. His civil rights work earned him a place in Montgomery County's freshman class of the Human Rights Hall of Fame. We're going to start by talking with Odessa Shannon, the first African American woman to serve on Montgomery County School Board and the former director of the county's Office of Human Rights. Also joining us is Ruby Rubens, a longtime resident of Montgomery County and an advocate for fair, affordable housing, high-quality education, and an avid defender of human rights and equality. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Odessa, we're going to go ahead and start with you.
Okay.
Tell us how you came to know Roscoe Nix and what are some of your fondest memories of him?
Well, I knew Roscoe when he started to run for the Board of Education. And that was a period of Montgomery County's history that I'd like to erase, to be quite frank. And later we'll probably talk about how Montgomery County was then. But Roscoe decided to run for the Board of Education. The African American, I like to use the word black, population in Montgomery County at that time was less than 4%. So it was quite a challenge.
Quite a challenge.
Quite a challenge, and he was running countywide. So my fondest memories are sitting around the table in his basement, because for all of the knowledge of him as a civil rights activist and a hitter of bottles of wine and that sort of thing, he was quite a strategist. I learned a lot from him about strategy. And those are some of my fondest memories, sitting around strategizing how we were going to do this campaign, how he was going to win in a county that was 98% white, and get the point across, get rid of that particular Board of Education. No, that was later. That was later when I got on the board that we had to get rid of that board. But Roscoe was so directed, so focused. My fondest memories, in addition to the strategy, he's also a philosopher. And you could sit around and talk about just anything, the world, his philosophy of the world.
That's wonderful.
And that's a side of him that a lot of people probably didn't know. And he also was a good writer. I don't know if you've seen any of his writings. But,
no, not really.
But he was an excellent writer, some of it almost like poetry.
Okay.
So that's another piece of Roscoe that I admire greatly. Although he did all these things that people know about, that side of him is a side that I appreciate more, and especially his courage in stepping out there during that time
He
to
certainly
say, I'm going to make a difference.
He certainly sounds like a Renaissance man. Ruby, can you share some of your fondest memories
And I
as
just
well?
want to take off Odessa's comment about his, he is, I think in the old days, I heard my grandmother say, identify a person as being a learned person, not an educated person, but a learned person, and that was Roscoe. I first met him not in Montgomery County, but in the church setting. When I came from New York to Maryland and was assigned to a job in D.C., I was church hunting, and I visited Church of the Redeemer Presbyterian, and Roscoe is a founding member there in Washington, D.C.
That's incredible.
In my visitation there, and a number of times we got to talk because we were both Howard alumni. And he started telling me about the instructors that we both had, who were the philosophers, the famous, the Alain Locke's, the Sterling Browns. We started talking about that. So as we talked, he started then telling me about his passion for social justice. And at that time, the Presbyterian Church was divided, Southern and Northern Church.
I see.
And he took a strong interest and activism in erasing that separation within the church. So he was on the commission with the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church that changed and merged the Southern and Northern Church in the Washington metropolitan area. So that was my first exposure to him, and I'll always remember him saying, my parents pushed me and were the cause of my being, because he grew up in Alabama, and he said of, I think, 11 or 12 children, something like that. And they said, we don't want you to have to pick cotton. So you have to be educated, and you have to, be an activist and believe in yourself. And that was his one thing, believe in yourself, because you can do it. So as I talked to him in that religious setting, we then talked about my house hunting and my, desire to move. And at that time, things were kind of sticky in terms of open housing, and we had not yet had the fair housing law had just, beginning to emerge. So he said, go to Montgomery County, let's go to, because he had moved here already, so he knew the setting. So we started looking here, and that's how I ended up looking for housing in Montgomery County and moving. So we've been religious, colleagues, family friends, as well as Howard alum that we talked about. So we have we had a very close relationship that I so really treasure. Yeah.
Your memories are so profound about Mr. Nix, and it's just wonderful to hear what you have to say about how you remember him. Odessa and Ruby both. Mr. Nix served on the Board of Education in the 1970s. What was Montgomery County like in those days? What were some of the interesting and unique challenges during that time?
Well, I don't even know where to start.
Well, we were growing. The demographics were changing slightly.
Slightly, yeah. They didn't really start changing until the 80s. The 80s. But things were happening in the schools that we didn't like. I moved out here in 1966 and went house hunting. This is before Ruby. Went house hunting and ran into some very unpleasant situations. And so I thought, is this the place I want to raise my children? I don't really know if that's so. But we found a house in a neighborhood that we liked, and we were able to move in. The county at that time was known as a liberal county. It was one of the first to desegregate after 1954 school acts. Although what was happening was that all the black schools were closed and the kids had to go to the white schools.
And it sounds like that there was so much going on at that time that you really had to make some significant decisions.
Some really
Very
significant decisions.
Ruby, Roscoe was known as a fierce leader, one who was direct and knew what he wanted for Montgomery County. Can you tell me what is your best memory of him from that perspective?
Well, first of all, I don't know whether in your research you heard about his involvement in downtown Silver Spring and desegregating downtown Silver Spring, particularly public accommodations. Because when he was at Howard University in the late 50s and trying to come to Silver Spring, he was not able to eat in places in Silver Spring. So he decided that he was going to integrate or sit in. So he and his friends held sit-ins in the restaurants in downtown Silver Springs. So he was very much involved in integrating public accommodations. And so that was another take on his social justice stance. And even once he became a resident and became very well known for his activism and the protests and so forth, he then became very active with the NAACP and with other community organizations that had a profound impact on particularly the black community in Montgomery County.
Not only that, he had no hesitation in taking on anybody.
Yeah.
The highest level of the county executive, the president of the school board, the superintendent, anybody. In fact, I understand that sometimes when he would walk into the schools, people would hide under the desk because they didn't know what Mr. Nix was going to be doing. Although he was a mild man, mild-tempered.
Rarely raised his voice.
But he commanded such respect.
And quite a presence, too.
Yes,
and quite a presence.
Absolutely,
yes.
absolutely.
Such respect that people would quake if something had gone wrong and,
Right.
and Roscoe Nix appeared.
Yeah.
So those are some of my memories of him too. All he had to do was walk in the room and people went, oh boy, what did we do?
Yeah.
You know, or
Yeah.
what's coming up now?
So that's where that fierceness comes
Absolutely.
in. That's
And
where you-
anyone who wanted to run for public office in Montgomery County, they knew they had to get by Roscoe.
That's
So
true.
what they would generally do is try to set up an appointment with him. He had two kinds of things, demeanors that he would do in order to get these people to have a discussion. The one was kind of an open forum. There used to be a restaurant called Copeland's in Rockville. So he would say, okay, we can have a meeting at Copeland's, and he would call all of us, his little crew, and said, make an appointment at Copeland's, but make sure we sit in the circle,
Which was
which
at the
was
front
at
of
the
the-
front of the restaurant,
in front of the
exposed-
mirror.
so that anyone who came in would see us. And they would say, oh, what are they up to? So that was our public venue. But then, if he wanted to meet one-on-one with a potential candidate or anybody who was thinking about running for office, he would meet them at the Anchor Inn in private. They would have a one-on-one
see.
conversation.
I
So that
see.
was his kind of well, let's have lunch at the Anchor Inn. So anyone who wanted to run for office or get anything in Montgomery County, you had to go by
through
Roscoe
Roscoe.
Go
Nix.
by Roscoe.
So he would either have you in the public venue or in that little private one-on-one.
And we loved the Copeland thing because there was the big window and everybody who passed by saw this group with Roscoe and said, oh dear, what is going
What
on?
are they
What are
planning
they up to?
planning?
What are they
What are they
planning
planning
now?
now? And he was invaluable when I ran my campaign. By that time, the black population was up to 4%. And we still had a countywide campaign to run. And Roscoe, with his strategies and the people he knew, guided us. Ruby was my campaign manager for that particular run.
Okay.
And he guided us through the process, and we won.
We're learning about a wonderful collective history here, so this is so exciting to hear all this information about your interactions and exchanges with Roscoe. It's interesting because we constantly talk about how children are so important and vital to understanding how they came to be where they are today. It's because they stand on the shoulders of those who've gone on. Do you think it's very important for young people to understand and know about Roscoe and everything he's done?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, education was one of his passions. He believed in being educated. Maybe not to have numerous degrees, which he did not have numerous degrees, but he was such an educated person. His pet peeve was to ever hear a black child or someone referring to a black child as acting white because they were smart. And with that in mind, he started with a friend of his, the African American Festival of Academic Excellence. He wanted to showcase black youngsters who were doing well in school. He wanted to make sure that they got recognized for being smart. That was one of his really, really big pushes. And I would want children and young people to know today that education is still, in his view, one of the #1 civil rights issues.
And that is a critical element. For those of you who've just tuned in, you are watching Mosaic, an African American perspective. I'm Deborah Milo, and we've been talking with Odessa Shannon and Ruby Rubens about the life and legacy of Roscoe Nix. We're going to take a quick break before hearing from Dr. Paul Vance, former Montgomery County Schools superintendent and current NAACP president. We'll be back.
Packers. Vikings. Packers. Vikings. Vikings.
Red state, blue state, vegan,
Carnivore.
We come from different places.
Uptown.
downtown,
Optimist.
We come to different conclusions.
half full.
But when we live united, we create real, lasting change in the building blocks of life. The education, income, and health of our communities,
Live
our families,
united.
even the person next to us.
Live united.
Real change won't happen without you. So give, advocate, volunteer, live united. Sign up at liveunited.org.
Here's your chance to save money and help the environment. Bring your reusable bag when you shop and you'll save 5 cents for every store bag you don't need. Retailers in Montgomery County charge 5 cents for the plastic or paper bags they provide. Why? Because plastic bags are the biggest single source of stream and waterway litter, causing pollution and flooding. And every year, Montgomery County spends $3 million on cleanup. So do yourself and the environment a favor. Bring your reusable bag when you shop. You'll fight litter and keep the change.
Serving your community is a great feeling. The Montgomery County Volunteer Center can connect you to hundreds of volunteer opportunities available throughout the area. Are you a student, senior, professional, community group, or business looking to serve? Simply visit our website to select what's right for you and get great ideas from past projects with our volunteer toolkits, or share a success story of your own. The Montgomery County Volunteer Center. Make an impact in your community. Where will you serve?
Welcome back to Mosaic, an African American perspective. We're talking today about the life and legacy of Roscoe Nix, and we're now joined by Dr. Paul Vance, president of the Montgomery County NAACP. Welcome, Dr. Vance. I understand you were very close to Mr. Nix. What are some of your best memories of Mr. Nix?
Well, Roscoe was a very dear and close friend of mine. Upon recollection, I believe that those conversations that Roscoe and I often had late at night. Sometimes I'd stop by his home to talk with him. Other times we'd be around the table planning and strategizing, and frequently would be on the telephone. But his counsel was enormous and always on target. And I do believe that Roscoe, being the person he was, saved me many times from many, many serious mistakes and pitfalls. And those would be my fondest recollections of Roscoe, the counsel and advice he was able to give me.
So it sounds like he was a wise sage.
Most certainly.
And
most
knew
certainly.
exactly what to tell you, could
Yes.
talk to you about your life and examine some things in your life also.
He knew I was, in spite of the white in my hair today, I was a young pup then.
Tell me something, how has the NAACP changed since Roscoe served as president, I believe, in the 1980s?
Well, you have to recall, if you will, that the NAACP was in what was then termed as a very liberal community. And we had persons, African American primarily, who were anxious to serve. Folk like the persons who preceded me, Ruby and Odessa.
Yes.
Folk of that quality and
Yes.
ilk were anxious to serve in capacities. And so Roscoe had that just enormous talent of being able to pull people together. You know, he was intense. He wasn't a charismatic. And that's important to know. He wasn't a charismatic, but he was a person who, because of his intensity and the commitment he had to improving social conditions for black folk in Montgomery County, he won people over, and they flocked to serve in these various positions, leadership positions in the NAACP.
Roscoe sounds like someone who was all about leadership building. When I spoke with Odessa and Ruby earlier, they talked a little bit about, you know, young people and how his influence would be so important for young people to really focus on. What can you tell me about how you feel, how young people need to know, what they need to know about Roscoe?
Well, I'm a case in study, because without Roscoe Nix and his prompting and his counsel, there would have never been a Paul Vance, who served as the first African-American superintendent of schools in Montgomery County. And the one thing that Roscoe convinced me of, he said, you are one, and you can do it. You don't need an army following behind you. And the message that I believe Roscoe would continue to give to young people in your various fields of endeavor, just remember, you are one, and you possess that God-given ability for leadership. And you don't need an army to line up behind you to work and serve you. And he did this. He believed in this. And he waged many a battle initially where he wasn't the most popular chap in the room.
Right.
And many people then came to him when they realized the soundness of his efforts. And he did so much where this county was concerned. You know, I can recall the initial effort in his efforts in his relationships with the police. Roscoe refused, although in private he would vent his anger. He refused to become publicly angry. He became dismayed over police tactics in Montgomery County. And so he began a campaign. He began a campaign to just make certain that this early identification of black males in particular by the police was mitigated. And then, as a consequence of his efforts, Montgomery County passed legislation, became a model for the state, and became a model for the nation. He never took an ounce of credit for that legislation.
Sometimes we hear people say that there are certain people in our history who are Renaissance. They have a Renaissance mindset.
Yes.
Would you say that about Roscoe?
Definitely, Roscoe was a Renaissance man. It was amazing. Roscoe was an essayist. He wrote beautiful, beautiful essays. I had the opportunity once to review one of his essays, and he had written it, and it just talked about the travail and the struggle of his people, because he loved black people. And Roscoe, I read it and I was in tears when I finished, because it touched me so much. And that was the power that he had in terms of his writing. He was a tactician and a strategist, incredible, immeasurable. I have never known anyone in my life experience who could plan and strategize as well as Roscoe could.
Many times you hear about people who don't have the ability to strategize. I heard Odessa and Ruby talk about that as well. When it came to strategy, that seemed to be paramount in order to get things really accomplished in Montgomery County for Roscoe.
Yes, it was.
How did he feel about young people and some of the types of different things we see in the media today? How young people seem to have no longer a respect for their elders or even their peers. How did Roscoe interact with young people?
The bane of Roscoe's existence was the emergence of this attitude of young African Americans, when they began to do well in school, were classified by their peers as acting white. And Roscoe was one of several other people who banded together and formed an organization, the African American Festival of Academic Excellence. And Roscoe was the one, along with others, who promoted and pushed that and made it live and vibrant. And he wanted to celebrate the works of young people. And so I get back to my point about what Roscoe would do with young people today. He would encourage them to just strive for the very best you can be, always.
Did Roscoe ever publish any of his essays, any of his great works or poetry?
To my knowledge, no.
No?
No, he never did. And he was a marvelous essayist. And his essays were almost like prose. You know, they were very touching and very beautiful.
That's remarkable. When you hear stories like that, as a child growing up, you know, we all hear about the tradition of African American folklore and how our parents and grandparents passed down many stories to us. It sounds like Roscoe, because he had such a rich and fulfilling life, he was able to also do that. And it sounds as though that he penned a great deal about some of his activities with the county.
He did. He did. And the other thing about Roscoe, you know, he was a person who loved music. Many times when Roscoe and I would be talking late at night, in the background, very softly, would be playing someone's classical music, you know, and Roscoe would just be listening to it while he talked with me. And that had a common, I don't know what he was doing, but he was calming me down. I think that's what he was calming that savage beast in me in those days. And so Roscoe was just planning smoothly, working that out of me. And there would have been, as I said earlier, there would have never have been a Paul Vance had it not been for Roscoe Nix. And Roscoe Nix was such a master strategist. You know, Roscoe said to me, look, you've got to go out. You've got to endear yourself to the Asian community.
I see.
Here is a list of the Asian leaders. I need you to contact them. And then he said to me, there is one Latino leader, Perche Rivas. He is the dean. Contact him. I contacted Perche, and what began was a love affair between the two of us. And I think that support helped me. The Asian community, the African American community, and then the white liberal community. And that pushed me over the top, because initially everyone on that board didn't want me as their superintendent. You know,
That
but
was
before
a
it was
tough
all
time.
over, it was a unanimous vote in my favor. And I attribute much of the success of that to the work that Roscoe Nix had strategized for.
Those were tense times and tough times, to say the least. I hear you talk about that Roscoe was a lover of music. Did he also, I don't know, for some reason I get the impression that he was also maybe endeared to jazz. Was he a jazz lover?
Oh, jazz and the blues, let me tell
yes.
you. Roscoe loved jazz and loved blues. And it was amazing. Roscoe was contemporary with his jazz, you know. And I would sit down and listen sometimes, and I'd sit around. He knows about John Coltrane, you know. He knows about Sonny Rollins. I said, but he also, at the same point, he knew about Billie Holiday. And I'm telling you, it was just amazing, the wealth of his knowledge. And he just didn't show it off. You had to almost pull it from him, you know. Even in his failing days, when I would visit Roscoe, when he was in the rest home, and we would talk about his mind was still sharp. It was amazing, you know. Rather than two old codgers there snapping their fingers and trying to remember, do you remember who this was? Roscoe could often tell me who that was and when it occurred and what really happened behind the scenes.
And that's the important part. That's so critical, what really happened, because so oftentimes we hear about the things that people want us to hear about. We don't hear about the grit and the dirt.
And the other thing that I think is important about Roscoe, he wasn't a bully. You know, very seldom did Roscoe have to mount the bully pulpit. You know, part of his strategy was always that many white folk, don't really know. They're not conscious. One of the essays he wrote that he delivered was entitled, I Am My Brother's Keeper. And in it, Roscoe goes on to talk about how it's on an unconscious level with many white folk, you know. They just don't know why they're doing these things. And often those are acts of just not knowing. They don't know they were wrong, you know. And so we were intent with Roscoe's leadership to make certain that we liberated them. And that was an important phase of Roscoe's leadership.
Dr. Vance, you have had such remarkable stories about Roscoe. It's as though I feel like I have a sense of his history now and may have even known him at one time. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. This is a really wonderful opportunity.
It's been my pleasure.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time. I want to thank our guests for joining us today to talk about the life and legacy of Roscoe Nix. I'm Deborah Milo. Please join us again next month for another edition of Mosaic, an African American Perspective.
Did you know there are more than 10,000 county government phone numbers? Now there is only one number you need to remember for non-emergency calls, 311. MC 311 is Montgomery County government's new online and telephone information system. Need information? Have a problem or complaint? Trying to locate a county government facility? Call 311. The call center is open Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. The website is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Remember, call 311 to get it done.